Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Lucinda Rouse.
And I'm Emily Bird. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. This week we'll be taking a look behind the scenes into an important voluntary sector role. And this follows, Lucinda, your trip to the Donkey Sanctuary last month to speak to their senior statistician.
Yes, that's right. Today we are going to walk you through a day in the life of a head of philanthropy. Now, I felt like this was a timely role to profile given the recent slew of less than positive news about the state of philanthropy in this country.
Absolutely, yeah. We have seen quite a few troubling stories in recent months. I'm thinking back to August, of course, when we saw the Charities Aid Foundation's latest World Giving Index. And that reported there'd been a long-term now decline in the UK's generosity, with the UK dropping out of the top 20 of the list of the world's most generous countries only for the second time on record.
And then, of course, around the same time, Pro Bono Economics published a report indicating that there is an appetite among wealthy British donors to give more to charities. In fact, £2.8 billion more in additional funding each year. And Pro Bono attributes this, I don't know if you want to call it shortfall, in the amount that wealthier people are currently giving compared to what they could be giving. They attribute that to the absence of advice on philanthropy from their financial advisors. So I wanted to find out how things are shaping up in this slightly febrile environment for people working at the coalface. And that is why I spoke to Charlotte Holmes, who is the head of philanthropy at Leukaemia UK. And we're going to start our time with Charlotte at the Dorchester Hotel in Mayfair, where they host their biggest annual fundraising gala.
We are in backstage at the Dorchester, getting ready for the 25th anniversary of our flagship fundraising event, Who's Cooking Dinner?
What does that involve?
It involves 22 Michelin star and celebrity chefs from across the UK all coming together for one night to each cook for a table of 10 guests who have kindly bought a table and bought guests all in support of Leukaemia UK. And we then have a live auction and a silent auction and hopefully lots of fundraising throughout the evening.
It's just gone 3:15. How many hours to go until your guests arrive?
3:15, 4:15, 3 hours. 3 hours, 15 minutes.
And you've got how many guests coming?
We've got 227.
And what has your role specifically been in all of this?
My role has mainly been managing our event committee. So we've got about 6 people on the committee who are all really supportive of table sales, who help us get chefs sorted. So managing them and then talking to our kind of high value supporters, making sure they're buying tables where they can, and just on the night making sure everyone has a brilliant time, as well as obviously coordinating our philanthropy team, making sure they're as supported as possible because events is very high pressure sometimes. So yeah, it's been a journey, but really looking forward to it.
I'm standing in the room where the event is being held at the Dorchester Hotel, and as you might be able to hear behind me, it is all stations go. Tables are being laid up. There are floral table decorations being brought in at great speed. Everybody is very smartly dressed. There's a band setting up on the stage. Lights are flashing, light testing being done. It's a beautiful room with chandeliers from the ceiling and on the sides of the room, mirrors, very luxurious. I'm sure it's going to be a very special night indeed.
Yeah, I have to say, the idea of just planning a dinner party for 10 people by myself sounds stressful enough, but 22 celebrity chefs, each cooking for tables of 10, it must have been quite a pacey environment with 3 hours to go until dinner time.
Yes, I'm not sure that she was overly appreciative of my presence with my microphone, but she certainly rose to the challenge. So now we're going to cut to the Leukaemia UK office, where I caught up with Charlotte a few days after the event, really just to dig into her professional life and found out how she got to where she is today.
My first role, well, my first career, I suppose, was different. I actually worked within football. So I started off working in the box office at Chelsea Football Club, which was my dream because I'm a big Chelsea fan, so I loved it at the time. And then I moved within Chelsea into the corporate sales team. So that was kind of selling the hospitality boxes, account managing the hospitality season ticket holders, which was a mixture of businesses and high net worth individuals. So I was there for 7 years, loved it, had brilliant experiences, but kind of realised actually I wanted to feel like I was raising money for something which was really important to me. So I said goodbye to Chelsea. It's still very much in my heart. And I went from there to Shakespeare's Globe, actually, which was my first ever fundraising role. I was corporate partnerships officer there to start with, I think, and then moved up to corporate partnerships manager. Obviously the Globe is a charity, but it was similar to Chelsea in the sense it was also kind of selling the boxes at the theatre, but also raising money through corporates and trusts and foundations. So I was there, I think, for 3 years, and then went on to be head of corporate partnerships Action Against Hunger, which is an international development charity. Absolutely loved that, but then moved on to the Royal Marsden Cancer Charity as head of corporate partnerships there. And that's where I kind of realised that I really love raising money for medical research cancer charities. Like, that's a cause which really means a lot to me. And the Royal Marsden Cancer Charity was just really brilliant at philanthropy. So although I was leading the corporate team there, I learned a lot in terms of major giving and trusts and foundations and special events. So when I saw the role of head of philanthropy come up at Leukaemia UK, I thought it was a really good opportunity to kind of broaden my experience in terms of not just leading corporate. So I'm now, leading all areas of philanthropy within Leukaemia UK and love it.
So what does that involve, practically speaking? What does a head of philanthropy do?
You've got me in a week where we do a lot. It's not always like this. Philanthropy at Leukaemia UK consists of corporate fundraising, trusts and foundations, special events, and major donors. There's some of those income streams that are more established than others, and some that we're building and growing at the moment. So special events is an area that, we've had huge success in with our Who's Cooking Dinner, which has happened over the last 25 years. So it's kind of thinking about how we build events like that, but also how we capitalise on them in terms of the people and the companies in the room, and making sure they know Leukaemia UK and they know us and they know what their support can achieve. It's then working with trusts and foundations, some of whom have supported us for quite a long time, and some of whom are new to us, and kind of identifying these new opportunities and what they could support. Same with major gifts, a newer income stream for us, but we've had some big successes this year, and we're also working with the pharmaceutical industry a bit more this year to raise money through them. Outside of the fundraising, we have a team of 4, including me, within the philanthropy team.
That's a really broad remit that you have, and I can imagine working for a larger charity, that role might be split up into multiple different people. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So it is a broad role, but that's what I wanted as well, to kind of get that experience of managing multiple income streams. And I think actually there's a lot of benefits to that because we are a small charity. There's so much crossover between trusts and foundations and major donors, for example, and the guests that attended Who's Cooking Dinner that can give in different ways. So it's actually really great that we're a small team and all involved in raising money through all the different ways that people can give, so that we can kind of utilise everyone's expertise.
Listening to Charlotte there, you really do get that sense of the breadth of the role. And as you said earlier, she is really just one person. There are some charities that do have teams, whole teams dedicated to this kind of major donor and philanthropy funding. But there's also a huge number, and I would say probably the majority of the sector, who don't have any kind of dedicated resource in this area at all. It's very much kind of a nice thing to have for a lot of charities rather than something that is essential. And you can hear just how many different strands of this work there is as well within her remit.
Yeah, absolutely. And she does have a team underneath her. Obviously, it wouldn't be possible for a charity of that size to be doing all of those different streams with just one person at the top. But I did ask her what she spends most of her time doing out of all of these different areas.
I think it depends what's happening at the time. So, for example, the start of this year, a lot was spent on kind of building some of the foundations for applications to pharmaceutical companies. They've got some quite strict timelines in terms of when we need to get applications in by. So it was working through those deadlines and prioritising those. And then actually in some of the more downtime where you're not committed to a specific deadline, it's just actually then going back and spending time just thinking about what are the relationships we have within this organisation, because a lot of philanthropy fundraising is connections based. So it's we need certain people to open doors or introduce us to trusts and foundations or major donors or corporates that can support us. So it's identifying, doing a lot of digging really, and identifying who we know that can connect us to who we want to know. So that takes up a lot of time, but it's really fun. And when you spot a connection and they make that introduction for you and you raise the money through that, it's all absolutely worth it.
From your experience, both here at Leukaemia UK and at other charities, when you're making those connections, when you've identified the link and then it's time to make your pitch to a potential donor, what is the recipe to success? What preparation needs to be done in order to have a successful execution?
It's one thing I actually love about philanthropy, that the recipe for success is so different depending on who it is you're asking. So I think for corporates, for example, it's much more about the kind of the long-term impact that they can have, but also the benefits to them, understandably, but the benefits to them as a business, what kind of promotional opportunities they'll get, recognition, but how we involve their employees in any partnership so they can all be proud and feel like they can fundraise and really get involved. But for certain trusts and foundations, for example, it's a completely different process. It's the written application which needs to stand out. And again, it's that impact for what is it that sets Leukaemia UK apart from all the other charities who are all doing incredible things. You really need to think about what is your USP. And for us, in some ways, that's the fact we fund kind of those early career researchers. And actually, we're funding the future leaders in blood cancer research. So donors are not just investing in research, they're investing in those people and their careers who are going to have the answers that we're all looking for in that research. The impact is a huge part of it, but it's also, I think it's all about people as well. So you have to know who you're pitching to. So some major donors will want to hear from you all the time, will want you to pick up the phone and have a proper conversation, and you should know their cat's name and you should know what they're doing for Christmas. And some of them would rather really, you never called them and you barely emailed them and you sent a letter once a year. So it's just knowing your audience really and the different things that different people want. That's what's really fun actually about leading philanthropy as a whole, that you've got all of those different income streams, and within those income streams you've got all the different types of trusts and corporations and people and what they all want, and just understanding that. So I think the key to success is really knowing your audience to start with.
I think what is really apparent in this as well is how much relationship building is a part of this work. And I think this is another reason why you maybe see less dedicated major donor philanthropy fundraising than you might otherwise, because it is very much about a long-term gain. A lot of the time we talk about, being able to get connected with a donor, building that relationship with them, encouraging them, to think of your charity as the place where their considerable wealth should be channeled. And for a lot of organizations, particularly ones who are under so much pressure, the ROI is understandably such a big factor of being able to prove why you should be channeling your efforts in a certain way. And in the same way that legacies are often something that get under-resourced because the return on investment is something that can take decades or even hundreds of years to come through. Okay, maybe when we talk about major donors, we're not talking about 100 years, but it might take you 5 years, say, to build that relationship up and to actually see that return on investment come in.
Yes, it's all about the relationships, the building of the connections, the identifying of where the connection is. That doesn't happen quickly a lot of the time. And also, as Charlotte says, such an important part is demonstrating the impact and showing the right things that will encourage them to support your charitable cause, where, as she says, there are so many other great ones out there. So at this point, we're going to move to a hospital attached lab And yes, I will let Charlotte introduce where we are and what we're doing there.
So today we are at UCL to do a lab tour with one of our John Goldman funded fellows, and she is going to talk to some of our supporters and some of our staff about the work she does and the research that we're funding. Noelle, who's our researcher that we're going to meet today, is an incredible researcher who is going to be one of the leaders in blood cancer research going forward, so it really showcases why their support is so important.
So you can see that this is the dots here. Each dot represents each colony, so it means it can grow from one cell. So they populate and then regrow again and again, so to form a colonies. And when you treat it with chemotherapy, you can see it wipe that out.
I'm Owen Williams. I'm a professor of cancer biology and head of the cancer section at UCL Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health. We're in the tissue culture suite of the cancer section, and we're looking at how we grow leukemia cells, which we've isolated from patients. And the reason we grow the leukemia cells here is to try and test different therapies to see which ones might be effective at killing them.
And we're here on a Leukaemia UK visit. How important are research charities to enable you to do your work?
So research charities are vital. So all of my staff at the moment that are in my group are funded by one charity or another. So without research charities in this country, we'd have a tiny fraction of the research, especially into cancer, that we have at the moment. So they play a vital role, and I think we're very lucky in the UK in that we have a vibrant medical research charity sector, which in many other countries, for example in Europe, it really is much smaller.
And so if you didn't have that funding from the charity sector, if you didn't have that revenue stream, how different would life be here?
Well, I wouldn't have a group for a start, so I would be on my own trying to do my own experiments, and I wouldn't have a lot of money to do them with. So there are many groups all throughout the country that simply wouldn't be doing research at the moment if we didn't have charities such as Leukaemia UK, and find new therapies, find kinder ways of treating cancer patients. We just wouldn't be able to do it.
So that was Owen Williams that we just heard from latterly, the Professor of Cancer Biology. And before that, we heard from the researcher Noelle, who is being funded by Leukaemia UK to do this research. And it was amazing to be in that lab setting to see samples dating back, I believe, to the 1970s that they have been tracking, all in the name of a cure. For leukemia. So now we're going to go back to my longer chat with Charlotte, and she's going to tell us how important those events are for her to deliver her role.
So many of our supporters that were able to attend, the feedback we had was just brilliant, because you don't get those opportunities to actually see where all that work happens. And, you know, there's been such huge improvements in treatments for leukemia. There's still so much more to do, but those are the people in that lab that are doing it, and those supporters are the ones that are enabling them to do it. So to be able to connect those two is really special. For me, one of the things I think sometimes we miss as fundraisers and we don't do enough is just saying thank you, because people, no matter why they've given, or whether it's a company giving or a trust and foundation, there's all people behind those decisions, and there's someone there that said yes, give the money to that charity, and it's going to make such an impact that we should be sharing that. And actually every time we do an impact report, we're learning as fundraisers where that money is going and how important it is. And it motivates us as much as anyone else to keep going, because sometimes fundraising is really hard and it's high pressure and there's lots of up and downs. But as you're reporting back to donors, it's just a reminder as well of why we're doing what we're doing and how important it is.
So going back to the daily grind of your work,
yes.
How much time is spent either at home, in front of a computer, versus out and about meeting people, organising events, that sort of thing?
Post-COVID, more time at home, I would say. And actually as fundraisers, we want to be out and about meeting face to face, especially within philanthropy, because relationships are so important. But actually post-COVID, so many people are now saying, no, let's just jump on a Teams call rather than have a coffee. And there's pros and cons to that, because it means actually it's much harder for people to say no to you, because they know realistically they can find 10 minutes for a Teams call. So that's good, but you don't get the same connections if you're not meeting face to face. But I think in terms of the daily grind, there's also the piece which is just in front of your computer, you know, firing off emails, trying to work out, as I say, those connections that we spoke about before, putting together those reports, writing the funding bids, and also making sure that we are recording all the information on our database, which does not sound fun, but it's really, really important, so that if someone comes in, they know what relationships we have and we know who's given what.
What's the hardest thing about your job?
What's the hardest thing? I think there's no hiding from your results, I suppose. You know, we set the budget at the start of the year that we need to raise this much, and we all know how important it is to raise that much, because it is going directly to fund research, which is desperately needed. It's a lot of pressure, I suppose, on the whole team to then make sure that we are raising that money. And there's things that are out of your hand, that you can do everything you think you can, but ultimately the decision isn't ours. So we need to be having as many conversations, getting as many applications out there, really convincing people that investing in Leukaemia UK is going to make the difference. But, you know, ultimately there's economic factors, there's, you know, other charities doing incredible things. I think, yeah, sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's a lot of pressure. But when you overcome that, and when you do what you say you're going to do in terms of the money raise, which I think we're going to do this year, it makes it all the more special for everything you and the whole team has been through.
But is it getting harder, do you think, to be raising the sort of money that you need? I know that in general, individual giving is suffering with the cost of living crisis. The sort of people that you're targeting are unlikely to be affected by that, but there has also been research showing that the wealthiest are proportionally giving less and less, certainly in the past few years. Is that reflected in what you're seeing, and how are you working around it, if so?
Yeah, I think it is definitely hard. I think we saw with Who's Cooking Dinner this year, it's hard to sell tables at that level. Like, they're £8,000 a table, so you're asking a lot of individuals. I think it all starts with having those foundations of people that can support you at that level, and if you don't, trying to have those conversations cold and make those connections is really hard, because it takes years in some cases to kind of get the relationships at that level where you can even make that ask. So it's also just time. I think, as you said, a lot of the kind of people that can give at that level are not as affected by the cost of living as others, but they're very aware of it still. So actually the causes that they're giving to are different. So they might be giving to more, you know, UK-based poverty charities, homelessness charities, that kind of thing, which is obviously completely understandable. And then that will have a knock-on effect. You know, other things that are going on in the world mean people are more aware of that and are giving to international development charities. So there's so much happening, and so many people want to support in different ways.
So I asked you what the hardest thing is about your job. What's the best thing about your job?
I guess I said the hardest thing was partly the pressure of those targets and knowing how important it is to achieve those. But then the flip side is when we do it, and when we raise the money, and when we get a big yes from a major donor or a trust, or when we have events like Monday night, the satisfaction of knowing that we've all come together and we've done that, and what that will lead to, right? It means so much. And Monday night was such an incredible amount of work, but it was nearly 300k raise, which could fund 2 of our John Goldman fellowships next year. So that's a huge impact on 2 of these incredible researchers' careers, and what that means they will then go on to do. So when you really sit down and think about it, like, we actually just achieved so much for so many people, because they will then go on to hopefully do the research which will change and save lives. So I think just as a fundraiser, you have to just keep in mind what you're raising the money for, and then when you get those yeses, it's amazing, and it makes it all worth it.
And if anybody's listening to this and thinking that they'd quite like a job in philanthropy, in partnerships, what would your advice to them be?
I think if you'd asked me on Monday about 3:00, I'd say don't do it. I would say it honestly is an amazing career. It really is, because you are surrounded by people, everyone that works at this charity, and to be honest, all the charities I've worked at work so incredibly hard because they're all motivated to raise money and work for a charity because they want to make a difference. And I know it sounds cliched, but you really do. So if you want to do something where you feel like you're making a difference and helping and supporting people, then this is absolutely something to consider. You have to be able to deal with that pressure, I suppose. But as I say, when you then get the yeses and you raise the money, it makes it all worth it. You know, I went from a sales job in football to fundraising, and I never looked back.
And that is arguably an unconventional way in, although there are obvious similarities in some of the skills that are required to get your end goal. But how would you advise somebody with no experience already to make a start in this area?
It probably was an unconventional way in for me, but there was also natural synergies between the work that I'd been doing. So I think try and just think about what it is you're doing at the moment that actually could support a role like this. You know, if you work in customer service, for example, fundraising is so people-centred that if you've dealt with customer service or work in retail and dealt with tricky customers all day long, then, you know, that will really, really help you in a fundraising job. I think also just try and learn as much as you can about the sector. So when I was thinking about moving into the charity sector, I spoke to a lot of people that were already in it in a variety of roles, so I could try and kind of work out what was right for me and also get a sense of, is this definitely what I want to do? But it is a great sector to be in. People really want to help each other in this sector as well. So people are really up for sharing knowledge and sharing how they got into their roles. So just, talk to as many people as possible, I think.
And if you were looking to hire a new member of your team, what would you be looking out for? Are you looking out for education, type, qualifications, experience? Like what's important to you?
So I don't have a degree actually, and I always worried that would make a difference, and it hasn't for me at all. I think I've luckily, had people that have seen probably that the qualities you need, not necessarily your education for fundraising, but it's the motivation, it's being able to kind of deal with and communicate with a number of different people and stakeholders, and that relationship management is really important, I think. So being a people person, I suppose, being willing to get your hands dirty. So, especially for a charity of this size, there's just a lot to do, and you will do a lot of admin stuff at the same time as doing a lot of funding bids and putting on special events and all of that, and that's fine, and I love all of that. So you want your team members to understand that and just be willing to do what's needed, but equally look after each other. I think that's one thing about the charity sector as well. You're raising money for causes which people that are going through leukemia treatment, have had a leukemia diagnosis, that's going to be one of the worst times in their lives, so you're dealing with that a lot. So you need that resilience, and you need to look out for each other as well and be able to talk to the people that are going through that.
It seems that a cover letter, or at least a kind of accompanying supporting statement, would be quite important when applying for a job in this area rather than a CV, because it doesn't sound like any of those things that you might see on a CV are actually all that important.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, obviously, people are always going to send in their CVs, but in terms of what I will look at, it's definitely the supporting statement for me, because also writing is a really important part of our job. But equally, it's that you want to see that they've really looked at what this charity does, and they want to work for Leukaemia UK and understand why they want to fundraise for this cause as opposed to all the other amazing causes out there. So it's really making sure if you're going to apply for a job at a charity, just know as much as you can about the charity and what they do, so that people really can see that this is the charity you want to work for.
We hope you enjoyed our day in the life of a head of philanthropy, and our thanks to Charlotte and the team at Leukaemia UK for letting me go behind the scenes at a pretty busy time for them. You can find out about a day in the life of a data scientist, a grant maker, policy advisor, and a charity procurement expert by clicking on the podcast tab on the Third Sector website and searching for Day in the Life.
And that's it for this week. We will be back again next week. In the meantime, please do leave us a rating or a review. We honestly do read and appreciate them. And in the spirit of that, we would love to say a big thank you to charity trustee David, who recently described us as a must listen on Apple Podcasts.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David. We hope you're having a great day wherever you are. Our producers are Till Owen and Navpal.